righty, excellent. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate everyone jumping on board with us here. We're going to get started here in just a minute, and we're going to let a few other people jump in here because I know we've got some stragglers, and I'll have you, Rebecca, kick it off. So let's give it another minute, and then we'll kind of jump into it. I know all of you that are attending are on mute. At the end, we will have some Q&A. So we'll open either up the lines or through chat. You can pose your questions and we'll answer those things. But we'll give another minute, Rebecca, and then you can start it off.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see so many faces on today's call. Excited to be here.
It's always hard in webinars, Rebecca, because everyone's on mute, so you don't get the feedback. It's like a comedian jumping out and they hear just a silent crowd. It's tough to get the spirit of what the audience is feeling, but we'll make the best of it.
Oh, it's an important subject, so I'm sure there is some excitement in the crowd for today's webinar, even if we don't get that feedback directly. We're just admitting a few more into the session now. Welcome to everybody. We have Nicole waiting in the lobby, just being admitted now.
Yeah, I guess why don't we kind of, as people roll in, since they're on mute, why don't we get started here, Rebecca?
Makes sense. So super excited to be here today, everyone. Hello and welcome to our webinar, Expanding to Mexico with Confidence, a guide to REPSE compliance and nearshore resourcing. Today's discussion is all about ensuring our HR leaders are informed on the importance of REPSE compliance, the opportunities Mexico presents for nearshore operations, and how partnering with a licensed provider like CXC Global ensures smooth, compliant expansion. So let's start by introducing you to your host today. Based over in Michigan, USA, we have Scott Eichel, our president and board member of CXC North America. Scott sits on the board of directors at the GEIO and previously at TechServe. He joins us as a seasoned executive with over 30 years in talent solution, specialising in strategic workforce strategies. And over the past year, he's led various transformation initiatives, shifting clients to value-driven solutions and strengthening CXC's leadership in workforce innovation. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
You.
From Brazil, we've got our very own Luis Minervino, our CFO for CXC LATAM, responsible for driving financial and operational success across Latin America. A seasoned finance executive, fluent in 3 languages, and has held various leadership roles at some of the top multinational businesses. Luis excels in navigating Latin America's diverse business landscapes and aligning regional performance with global goals. Welcome, Luis.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon to all of you. Good morning, wherever you are.
Nice to have you both leading today's session. And of course, you've got myself, Rebecca Minnie, HR business partner for CXC. Near on 20 years service to the profession and a passion for people. I'm responsible for supporting our CXC teams across EMEA and the Americas. And very kindly joining us today, we're pleased to have our legal advisors from Trust Consulting on the call, here to protect you, here to protect us, and bring some unique expertise and insights to the discussion. Welcome, Miriam. Welcome, Fernando. Very good to have you here on the call. Before we start, just to let you know, we expect the session to run for about an hour. There'll be the final 15 minutes dedicated to answering your questions in relation to this topic and how CXC may support your expansion into Mexico. If you've got any questions during the session, please share them via the chat. The session will be recorded and we will be sending it out to you shortly after the event. Please remove any distractions, hold on to your seats, take your notes. Drop your name in the chat, let us know where you're calling from, and enjoy the webinar.
Right. Excellent. So are we ready? I don't hear any drum roll or anything. So excited for everyone to be here. Thank you, Rebecca, for the kind introduction. I appreciate it. And As Rebecca mentioned, unfortunately, for all of you on the line here, I've been in this industry a long time, so you have to look at this mug for the next hour or so. So I apologize about that. I can't make myself look any better. But I've been doing this for about 30 years now, and through that 30 years, I've seen so many different changes that have happened across the global landscape of being able to being able to access global talent in some of these key developing markets, but also key markets that have tremendous STEM talent. And I've seen it shift in some global markets almost monthly. Other markets, it's a little bit longer, but as soon as a new economic adjustment happens in those regions, certainly there's a flow down with new legislation, new regulation that gets sort of pushed down. Mexico is a prime example of sweeping changes that impacted being able to leverage through either third-party service providers such as CXC, anybody that's providing third-party staffing or third-party payroll solutions, agent of record, employer of record like CXC, were impacted by this. I happen to reside here in the Motor City. For those of you are familiar, Michigan obviously has been sort of the automotive capital of the world, certainly here in North America for a long time. And we've seen, especially prior to the early 2020s, a boom that sort of happened in terms of leveraging our great regional peers and providers there in Mexico with setting up there was all kinds of new assembly plants put into place, all kinds of new service lines that were put into place. A lot of third-party staffing and payroll providers, AOR, EOR providers, all popped up. It was sort of a boom time with our relationship in Mexico, Nearshore to Mexico, and it certainly was a boom time for leveraging the tremendous talent that resides in that local marketplace. It's certainly a high-growth area and continues to be. That changed in the early 2020s with labor reform policies that were put into place that seemingly overnight change that dynamic. All of a sudden, leveraging the tremendous talent pools, especially on the STEM side in Mexico, became very challenging and difficult to access. Today, we're here to discuss how the introduction of REPSE, which is the licensing to be able to provide some of the services there, how that made it more challenging to benefit from that talent pools and options to be able to still take advantage of it. There are great options to still be able to leverage it. We'll talk about that as we go through the demonstration here. But you want to make sure you're doing it with very compliant partners because this is not an easy get in terms of having that licensing in Mexico. So the first question is, what is REPSE, right? Everyone might be wondering, what does that really mean? It's really a registry of providers of specialized services or specialized workers. And it is not a simple file for it and get an approval. Very few partners and service providers receive the ability to have this REPSE license. It lasts for about 3 years. We just re-upped again here at CXC, so we've got another 3 years on it. And it certainly has impacted a lot of our contemporary peers in this space that provide payroll solutions, agent of record, employer of record, aligned kind of service lines. As I mentioned, trying to secure that license is a challenge. It's not easy. It takes a lot of documentation and process. That's why we have our legal representation here to talk about if any questions come up, because it's something that one thing we stand by and one thing all of our partners expect of us is that we do things extremely compliantly within the regions that we're servicing. And REPSE was one of those areas we were well ahead of the game to get on board with being compliant in that region. So let's talk and jump into some of the agenda items. First of all, let's overview a little bit of why nearshore resourcing in Mexico is so viable. Anytime you're trying to leverage talent, everybody has kind of talked about all of the global outsourcing availability in a lot of different global markets, such as India, Philippines, all over throughout Eastern Europe. But those have challenges as you continue to look at those strategies as an employer. You've got in some of those global markets, because of time zones, you've got resources working in their evenings. When they work in those evenings, it becomes highly competitive. So you have higher attrition. issues that hit with regard to being able to keep those key personnel. There's a lot of challenges there. So Nearshore became a really, really big impetus because of the time zone alignment, as well as the local speaking skills of English. Obviously, we've got some nearshore alternatives here right near our, North American markets, and our neighbors to the south there in Mexico are one of the best that we need to look at. We've got other parts of LATAM here. I've got Lewis, who sits in our LATAM market as our CFO, can also speak to some other global markets as questions come up, but it's certainly Mexico's right next to us and the time zones are great. Being able to leverage that is very important. Obviously, the proximity to the US and Canada, I mentioned the time zones and the English speaking capability. Also, the availability of the supply chain of really good, strong STEM talent. It resides in that market. There's also a great cost value. There is a difference between leveraging talent in Mexico than there is in other global markets. It's not as attractive as, say, India and the Philippines, but it's still extremely attractive. So you look at a cost variance of about 50%, whereas the Philippines and India may be closer to 70% per resource. You see it a little bit different in Mexico, but it's still a great cost advantage when you look at that 50% kind of difference between, let's say, a full stack developer in North America with 5 years versus somebody in Mexico. In addition to that, we've got favorable trade terms with Mexico. The other thing that is big is really just the technology advancements that the market itself has been putting into their country and into some of the government pushes for large investments in the IT infrastructure and tech hubs. You look at cities like Guadalajara or Monterrey. They're earning a reputation of being sort of the Silicon Valley of Mexico. So you're seeing great STEM talent building out of that. And the country itself is putting a lot of investment in enticement to be able to put out some of the best talent in the global markets. Some of the industries leading the push for nearshore and offshore solutions are really, you guys all know them. It's a lot of heavy IT. It's a lot of manufacturing, automotive, a lot of engineering, life sciences, healthcare, financial services. A lot of logistics firms and e-commerce related firms are really pushing that adherence and alignment to, we need to push more assistance offshore and capitalize on the talent pools. And when I talk about the talent pools, I mentioned it earlier in the discussion, if you are an employer not thinking about leveraging the global landscape for talent, you are going to be left behind. I had a discussion with CIOs recently in the last year, where the common question from most CIOs is, how do we win the war on global talent? And what I respond affectionately to these CIOs is that you can't win because you've already lost. Talent is not in abundance for certain skill sets. Yes, the North American market has taken a little bit of a downturn, but if you look at certain skill sets, most of them still a 20-to-1 ratio. So you got 20 opportunities for every one resource, let's say, in most IT skill sets. So with that being a reality, and the market coming back around in 2025 to be very feverish with regard to the war on talent, if you're not thinking globally, you're going to have a lot of challenges moving forward and getting your overall initiatives successfully completed. So let's talk about some of why REPSE from a compliance standpoint really matters. I mean, the key of it is really, again, REPSE stands for really that register. It's that registry of service providers, or especially service providers in the market. And again, that was a marked pivotal shift with that regulation in 2021, I believe, is when that first was announced. But being attached to an organization that's fully compliant with the REPSE licensing really protects you from a legal compliance standpoint, because if you don't have a partner that has REPSE licensing, there is something called joint liability. So even though you think you might be using, let's say, a payroll AOR, EOR provider that says, oh, I can help you in Mexico, and they're skirting around their ability of really having that REPSE license. So if you're not validating their licensing is up to date and still viable, you still are on the hook for joint liability. And that's what a lot of organizations don't really realize. They think that's the many of our discussions I have with employers around, well, that's not our problem, that's our service provider's problem. What I'm saying is that isn't the case in Mexico. You will have joint liability. There's also operational risk if you're not working with a partner that has the REPSE license. The operational risk, they could shut you down. You're also at risk of audit. Your reputation can be diminished. You may have restrictions on the ability to do general business activities. There's also tax and social security alignment elements that we have to adhere to as part of being adherent to the REPSE licensing. We are a compliance first based organization, always have been. That's why our reputation is such that we haven't had any issues in the marketplace that a lot of our contemporary peers have. But REPSE really ensures that there aren't any issues with tax evasion. As an employer or as a service provider, you may be at risk for tax evasion investigations. There are also some big financial penalties that can come along with this. We're talking financial penalties that aren't just a couple $1,000s. We're talking upwards of $200,000 plus for each instance that could happen. So it's not small potatoes when you're working with a partner and with joint liability. You just have to make sure you're validating. Use us, don't use us, but other partners, what we're trying to advise all of the people on this line, as well as others in the global marketplace, is just do your due diligence to ensure your partners are fully compliant. It's also ensuring that you're a big, and I'll let Lewis and others speak to this. Big reason why this was enacted is people were taking advantage of the pools, and they were not really having ethical labor practices. They were not treating the employees the right way in the local markets, and that's why the government pushed this down to make sure people were utilizing the resourcing in an ethical way. So we make sure that we're adherent to the labor reform issues, that labor reform items that Mexico really wanted to push through. It also will provide you unfettered access to global talent if you're working with a partner that truly has that REPSE license. So if you have a lot of need in IT or STEM skill sets in engineering, manufacturing, life sciences, mathematics, whatever it may be, you want to make sure you're validating that. It also protects you against reputational risk. I know that it seems like that's more of a non-tangible item, but reputation is a lot, especially if you ruin your reputation with a partner such as our partners in Mexico. You will have a really challenging time rebuilding that reputation. And I'm a big supporter of looking at your resource planning as an organization and leveraging your global initiatives. The easiest way to do that is, again, support through nearshore options. It used to be thought that Mexico was shut down from that opportunity because the REPSE licensing. What we're saying is there are options for you to take advantage of some of the great, fantastic talent that resides in that market. So please don't eliminate in your thought processes around the ability to capture talent that may reside in that local marketplace. The other addition to this, because of close proximity and time zones, it gives you some operational advantages, allows you to get a little bit more cost advantage. Some back office elements can be positioned there. Some IT back office can be positioned there. So there's a lot of rationale why to leverage those items. And I know that goes without saying, but I can't repeat it enough. Myself, having been in this in a long time, I'm always looking at trying to reinvent our business and try and reinvent myself about every 6 months or so as it relates to the global talent landscape. We need to be looking at, from all corners of the globe, how do we take the most advantage, but also as an employer, how you look at the best talent, not just the talent that may be best in your local 50-mile radius. And this helps you with avoidance of any type of service disruptions that we've talked about. It gives you some competitive advantages as well. So in addition to that, what are some of the critical, elements for North America to look at in terms of that compliance? Just to kind of regroup what I talked about at a high level, it's going to ensure your legal compliance with Mexican labor laws. That's number one. Make sure you have it. If you don't have it, your partners have it, because you don't want to have that come back to you in terms of any type of audit or risk of potential financial penalties. It also protects companies, as I mentioned, from legal and financial issues through the audit. It also helps you minimize the risk of operational shutdowns. It creates this operational sort of operational seamlessness throughout your entire enterprise. It allows you to give insurance of transparency for ethical and employment practices, fair labor practices. It allows you to have transparent agreements throughout, allows you to have support of the tax and social security compliances. And it demonstrates, as I mentioned, ethical and sustainable business practices. So with that, I want to pass this over to my partner here with Louise to highlight some of the REPSE elements in safeguarding both the company and workforce and your workforce from legal and financial risks. Louis, can I hand it over to you?
Sure, of course. Thank you, Scott. To start, I would like to only highlight a few things that Scott has just mentioned. And one of them, and I think is one of the most important things that we were able to do back in 2021, was how hard it was to get the certification. It was very difficult to get, and only 4% of all the contingent workforce providers were able to get that license. Only 4% of all the companies that applied for the REPSE licensing. And one of the things that the government looks to get the REPSE is how well the company that is requesting the license is on its financials, in its compliance. We cannot, as an example, we cannot have any employee litigations or any kind of disputes or any open labor taxes. So none of them can be open, and having some of these things can jeopardize of having the license. So saying that, it's like everything that we need to do and everything that we need to be compliant to keep our license. Other thing that Scott mentioned is that we renewed our license in May this year, May 24, proving that we have all the capabilities to perform as a REPSE in Mexico. I think Scott didn't mention exactly what that means in Spanish, but REPSE is a register for companies that from providers. So the correct name in Spanish is Registro de Prestadores de Servicios Especializados y Obras Especializadas, which means that it requires this certification to operate as a workforce contingent. And we as CXC are always trying to work together with our clients and partners on which are the specialized services we need to have in our license. So example, as Scott mentioned, engineering, architects, IT folks, human health insurance. So these things that we are expanding as we check the necessity of our clients around the globe that wants to be in Mexico or even in other countries in Latin America, but most in Mexico for the REPSE license. So if the operational risks of not having the license, there is a lot of, you can have disruptions of your services, you can have a reputational damage, you can have big fines to pay, and these fines can also impact the financial stability of the companies. And again, as Scott mentioned, it's a joint responsibility of the provider and the end client. So working with REPSE has made us CXC in Mexico expand and be 100% compliant with all labor laws there. Scott, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Louis. And just to reiterate, as you're evaluating your partners, you want to make sure that they are following the regulatory requirements that are outlined in those regions. We're talking today about Mexico, but it could be similar to Costa Rica or other parts of LATAM. You want to make sure you're doing your due diligence. Either that, or you have to start to build your own entity in these local markets, which is a big cost for organizations. That's why the value of partnership with companies like us and others in that sort of competitive landscape are of such benefit, because it's really reducing at the end of the day your cost to have to set up and prop up these major infrastructures in these countries, and having partners that have this are going to be very important. We talked a little bit about the reputational risk earlier. I've seen a number of, for 30 years, a big portion of my experience was in the staffing industry. In traditional staffing industry, there are a lot of unscrupulous providers in that segment that have really ruined a lot of North American companies' reputations by violating these REPSE licenses. Make sure you're doing deep due diligence with your partners. Ask them the right questions. Make sure they're transparent. Transparency is everything. And it's transparency not just with your partners, it's also with the countries in which we serve. Lewis had touched a little bit about really the painstaking measures we take in making sure we're ahead of the curve of this. We do this not just in Mexico, but in all kinds of global markets we're servicing, is making sure we're in touch with what's happening within the political landscape and what's coming down the pipeline with new changes to regulatory items and statutory items. Make sure you're dealing with your partners and asking some of these key questions as part of your general practice of vetting them. One of the big things that we try to really share with everyone is we're in a space that a lot of providers can pop up tomorrow. There's not a lot of barrier of entry to have partners start in the payroll providing solution space or the staffing space. They can put up a shingle tomorrow. You want to make sure if you look at them, you can validate and ask them questions about, have you been audited? If you've been audited, have you successfully passed these audits in these countries in which we're asking you to service us? There are a lot of firms that if you go into that depth, it's the same thing like going to a medical doctor and you asking them, if they've had any type of malpractice issues. You want to ask these type of tough questions because as you dig in deeply, there are a lot of contemporary peers in the space that don't want to be as transparent as they need to be. And with that, it's putting yourself at risk. It's putting your clients at risk. I've been doing this a long time. It is not brain surgery in terms of the services we provide, but it takes a lot of focus and a lot of resources to make sure we're always on the cusp of what's changing, to make sure we're protecting our end clients. You want to make sure you have that same type of structure and discussion process with all your partners today. So, as we discuss some of the HR elements within ethical expansion of your business, I'm going to turn over to Lewis to touch on some of the due diligence items. But again, we can't understate the value of ensuring your partners have a licensing that you can validate. It's like even one of the things we talk about when we're talking about independent consultants. It is making sure when you have, and this is a little bit of a different topic, but when you talk about licensing, when you're leveraging corp to corp or independent consultants, it's the same type of validation process of ensuring that it's up to date. We believe that you should always be auditing in the IC world at least twice a year, because a lot of these organizations, they'll go through the process and then subsequently eliminate some of the continued support of the licensing or payment of the insurances, so on and so forth, so that they at least can pass through the initial process, and then they go back because of a cost reason. They go back and say, look, now we've added a few more points to profitability. You want to make sure you're always doing the due diligence and digging into how strong and how often you're validating they're up to date. So Lewis, if you want to jump into some of the HR role in insurance compliant and ensuring compliance with your ethical expansion, let me turn it over to you for a minute.
Of course, Scott. So what we do every day in Mexico is be very close to our labor lawyers, of our external consultants, and even ourselves to dig in all the changes of the legislation that happens in the country. And we are very close to our HR partners to understand their needs and helping them with the audits of all our compliance methods. So checking the workers' documentation, checking the payment of taxes, checking the enrollment at the government systems that allow the government to follow up on all the workers if they are being correctly treated, if they have the medical exempt they need, if they really compliant with the legislation, and if all the taxes are payable. So we do it on a monthly basis, of course, when checking all the new workers, and when someone leaves, it's the same thing. We have to check if everything has been done. We check with a reconciliation chamber in Mexico that helps us with our clients and also with the workers, that everything that were done during the period of the work was compliant and 100% in conformity with the local laws and the tax payments. Scott?
Thank you, Louis. And were there some from a practical step with HR, Louis? Are there any additional advice that you have for HR and talent acquisition resources as they evaluate how to onboard resources as it relates to the talent pools there, not specifically just validating do they have the licensing, but what's the onboarding process look like typically in Mexico?
Yes, the onboarding process takes some time because we need to have the full documentation of the worker. So it's pretty normal in countries in Latin America that it looks like from 3 to 5 business days to gather all the information from the worker. And the most important thing is to include the worker into the government system that allows the worker to have access to Social Security and have access to the statutory benefits the government offers. So it's important for HR to check if the worker is ready to work in Mexico, if it's a Mexican nature, if has the documentation to be onboarded correctly. So we do all these verifications and we can work with all HR showing what's the compliant documents they need to have prior to the onboarding process.
Thank you, Louis. The big subject here today is not just about REPSE, but the view of leveraging global talent. It's a topic point that's near and dear to my heart because having been in this space for so long, I've learned very quickly that you need to open your eyes to the available talent that resides globally. And what does that mean? That means as an organization, you need to prepare your operations to say, I may not have a resource that sits right next to me, and I've got to be comfortable with that. I sat down recently with a large organization to talk about what they should be planning for as they look to resource planning in 2025 and 2026. Being on the cusp of looking and evaluating as you're doing your resource planning process, first saying, what can I have that I know can be virtual when I'm looking at my resource planning process? Obviously, the COVID era forced every organization to go through that real quickly. And there were a lot of roles that for a long time was viewed as I cannot have this not be sitting right next to me. This is a role, it has to be on site all the time. And boy, did the world shift very quickly. Now, as part of global resource planning, what I advise a lot of CEOs today is sit down as part of that process, and you're starting to stack rank the type of needs that you have. Build a column that says this can be hybrid or virtual for some of these roles, and you start to evaluate a global landscape of where can I best pull in that talent. And look for advisors to give you guidance on where to find some of that best talent, because there are certain markets that are more attractive than others in terms of the talent pool that exists for those skill sets. By way of example, you look at the Philippines, has a tremendous talent pool within the healthcare arena. So a lot of organizations have gone to that market. And in India, it's been heavy IT. And other markets such as Nearshore in Mexico or Costa Rica, where it's heavy strength in IT-related skill sets and engineering-related skill sets. Eastern Europe. The key to those elements is really look at key partners as you're evaluating your business and saying, how can I talk about resource planning and strategically aligning to the global markets that'll give us, number one, cost advantage, but also the best access to the best talent, not just the best talent that resides in my local proximity where possible. Listen, I'm a realist. I know there are certain skill sets you can't have be virtual or hybrid. I know that especially in certain engineering related skill sets. So with that, that's a reality. But where it can be done, what I'm advising and what I'm imploring employers today to do is really look at it very pragmatically about what can we really do differently. Right now, you've got certain skill sets. One thing I'm preparing a lot of organizations for is you've got certain skill sets that come 2025 that are going to go up between 2.5% to 5% a quarter in terms of average expectation of hourly bill rates. So there are certain skills with that a reality here in the United States that are going to make a financial crunch for a lot of organizations today through their contingent workforce programs or internal HR talent acquisition programs. They're saying, wait a minute, we set our budgets are now in place. We have these rate cards, but there are certain skill sets that are completely changing. The way you can help provide some relief to your organization is now saying, let's look at a global landscape. How can we do this globally? Because if our rates are such here in the US that we know there are certain skill sets that are changing 2.5% to 5% a quarter, I need to now really look and say, where can I get a better cost advantage? Nearshore should be your first look, and then global should be your next look. So one thing you can count on with CXC is we love to be viewed as sort of your free advisor. And what I mean by that is even if you never buy anything from us as an organization, our philosophy here is value at every discussion. So even if we can't provide the solution for you or provide a service line that aligns exactly with what you want, we can help advise you on where you can get those things. So look at us as sort of your go-to partner to say, hey, can I just ask you a few questions? We're happy to do that. We're happy to be part of that partnership world because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. The global talent pool is going to continue to be a challenging topic, and all of us are going to have to get through it together. Please look at us to be able to help you get through those, through some of those challenges that may, you might be looking at in 6 months from now. I talk about it as the brick wall that you're not there yet with. How can you prevent the brick wall you might hit in 6 months or in 9 months? Look for partners to help guide you there because that's what we do. That's what some of our peers do in this space. Every single day, we can give you some of that free advice and guidance so that you can pivot away and make sure your budgets don't get thrown out of control. So with that, let me turn over to you, Rebecca. Were there some last closing things you want to talk about from an HR standpoint or from a general overview standpoint that you want to share with the group? You're on mute, Rebecca.
Thank you both so much for your insights today. Really interesting topic. Some pitfalls we must all be aware of, not only as HR leaders, but also employers, businesses, and REPSE license holders. It's been an interesting discussion. There's been some very informative insights. I hope everybody else found the session useful. I'm sure you have. And we'd like to open that up now to our attendees for your questions to our speakers today.
Please, we're going to put those in chat, right, Rebecca? Or are we opening it up in terms of the mics? We're just going to do it in the chat section,
We're
correct?
going to do it in the chat. Yeah, please put them in the chat. And I'll start one off then. So Louise, interestingly, I noted that under the REPSE license, there are certain roles and certain industries that would be covered under a partner's license. And, if a role's not covered under that license, Louise, is there a solution that CXC can provide?
Thanks for the question, Rebecca. Yes, there are some solutions we can provide. The first one is there is a limit, an extra limitation from roles that are not applied into our REPSE that we can use. But the good thing we can do is to understand the needs of the client, and if necessary, we can expand our license, our REPSE license. It's not a difficult process to do. We just need to explain why and which are exactly the job descriptions for that new role that we don't have into our REPSE.
So fairly straightforward then, Louise. That wouldn't be too much of a challenge for us.
Correct.
I think that, sorry to interrupt, Rebecca. I think one of the, if there's one underlying message to the global group here, the message is our nearshore partners in Mexico is wide open again. So a lot of North American companies and global companies have figured when REPSE first got put into place, figured, oh my gosh, we can no longer leverage it, and it sort of was abandoned. what we're trying to say to you is with us or with somebody else, there is fantastic talent with our peers in Mexico, and we should take advantage of it. There's great cost advantage. There's also great time zone advantages, a lot of reasons. So what we're trying to tell you all is it's opened up. Look for a partner that provides you that sort of free way to be able to take advantage of the partnership and the resources in that market, but don't abandon it. There's great talent in that local market, and we want to help you leverage it to the best extent that you can. So I seen that there's already, is there a question that just popped up?
There is, Scott. Yeah, we've got a great question here from Gabriella. And Gabriella points out that there are some specific certifications for the oil and gas industry, for example, and other industries. Does REPSE replace any of them, or is it an additional certification?
It's an additional certification, mostly because it's the contingent workforce provider that needs to have the license, and it's not related to the specific of the industry, as oil and gas, as she mentioned, but it's an additional license that these companies need to have to perform, to be able to perform this kind of solutions.
You're saying, Louis, is that just because you have a REPSE license for one thing doesn't mean you have it for all skill sets. It's really skill specific. And ours is pretty vast, so that gives us a lot of options. But even if it's a rare skill we don't have, we can guide you on how you can potentially take advantage of it. Like I said, either with us or with somebody else. But we're here to be your conduit to at least ask the right questions.
Thank you. We've got another question coming in from Gemma. Gemma Cornish is just typing in the chat now, and we are looking forward to answering your questions. Thanks very much for your question, Gemma. So how does REPSE requirement change based on the O&G contractors versus offshore assignments?
Let me see if I agree with it. How does REPSE requirement change based on the oil and gas contractors on versus offshore? To be honest with you, I don't know that there is any difference in terms of the requirement change, as long as they have the REPSE license, if I'm understanding the question correctly. Regardless if it's offshore or REPSE, we still can assist or help you there as long as the REPSE is in place, regardless of in Mexico or elsewhere. Can you clarify what you're really asking? I want to make sure I understand it correctly.
Oh, I said in great anticipation, Gemma. Thank you so much for hitting the chat there.
And what was something that you here? Expand. Let's see.
Just wait for Gemma to clarify a point there in terms of onshore versus offshore assignments for the oil and gas industry.
While we're waiting, was there something that I think, Cassie, you wanted to ask?
Cassie has asked, are there any additional fees or savings to your compliance?
Additional fees, no. It is all wrapped in our process. We don't tag on additional fees for having a REPSE license. It is something that is a value add we provide to all of our partners. So you will not expect with CXE or any of the partners we may refer you to here or elsewhere that would be an additional component. We believe in transparency and pricing. And that becomes part of us doing business. So there wouldn't be an additional cost.
And returning on Gemma's question, what I understood from there is that if the workers are based in Mexico, it depending on the international waters or the proximity or the opposite of the proximity, the land from Mexico, it depends on what kind of licenses will be needed. But if the company is based in Mexico, the REPSE license is needed.
So Gemma has just clarified in the chat for us now. And thank you so much, Gemma, because Gemma comments that CXE currently partner with Gemma and her business, and they have confidence that they are in good hands. But was curious to know if there was any additional component in terms of whether that assignment, as you say, Luis, is based onshore or offshore around Mexico.
Yeah, we need to analyze it from where exactly it is in international waters and the proximity with Mexico. But I don't see any extra component needed there.
Excellent. Can you talk a bit about reporting and documentation to provide to demonstrate REPSE compliance?
We do have a certificate that proves that we have the REPSE and which are the jobs and which are the categories we are registered to have to work as a REPSE that we can share with our clients if they need it. We are full CXC. Mexico is audited and have all the necessary certificates to be a representative and to have the REPSE license. As I said a few moments ago, we just renewed our license, which proves that we are in compliance with the regulations. And of course, as I said, we do have this certificate that we can share with our clients if needed.
Excellent. And I remember you saying, Louise, about, you know, how difficult it was to obtain that license when we first went through that process, and how we had to evidence a number of compliance levels and show, you know, no past liabilities. Remind me in the group, Louise, what was the percentage that qualified for a license through that application process, of which, of course, CXC was one of those?
At the beginning of the process, when it started, when the key turned to the on, you need to have the license, only 4% of the companies that applied were able to get, only 4%. So imagine in a market, well, today, Mexico is the second largest economy in Latin America, a GDP of $1.8 billion, 130 million people living in Mexico. So imagine the quantity of companies that were working as workforce providers. And when the third year happened, they were not able to provide services with the quality they need to do. So only 4% were qualified for that, and CXC was one of them.
Ooh. And so, I mean, it goes to show how difficult it is to obtain a REPSE license, and how credible you must be as a business holding that license and offering those services to others. So, of course, that they can, you know, tap in to that market where there is so much talent to be had as we continue the war for talent.
It's interesting because when we talk about these things, I mentioned earlier in the call that there's sort of somewhat of a seedy underbelly to the services industry in presenting and portraying that they have an ability to assist you in these markets. I think it is imperative to stay very diligent on asking the key questions of your partners and asking for proof. We believe in doing that. Most of the good peers we go against every day believe in doing that, but there are some unscrupulous ones in the marketplace. Please protect yourself. Please ask for proof. Please ask them when it was last updated, because you may have one from 4 years ago that they didn't actually get reinstated of, and it's lapsed, but they've given you proof of something that may be 4 or 5 years old. You want to make sure you have those things that are updated and ensure that it's new and up to date. You know, as a final thought, because I think we're wrapping things up here with the last couple minutes. I didn't see any other questions pop up. You know, collaborating again with a REPSE licensed provider such as CXC or others, that the few that do have it, is not just a regulatory requirement, it's a strategic decision to protect your business from fines, reputational risks, operational disruptions, so on and so forth. It ensures that you will remain compliant with the Mexican labor laws. It'll safeguard your operations, and it positions you as a responsible and ethical market partner. And that's what's most important. We're a global organization that can essentially any non-sanctioned country, we can help you. But how we do that is because our reputation of being compliant in these countries is unparalleled. We make sure we make that a priority as a business. You're in safe hands with those, and we're willing to prove that. That's why you want to ask that with other partners today. we'd be happy to be your partner in your expansion, or even be your free advisor if you have questions at any given time. Take me up on that anytime. I'm happy to do it. And I'm not just saying that to throw that out. I have a lot of conversations every week for folks that ask me these simple things. We're happy to help. I really appreciate everybody coming together here on this call. I understand days are busy and we're getting close to the holidays, so this is sort of a tough time for everyone to jump on. It's important to us that you are kind enough to join us. Please feel free to reach out to myself, Louis, Rebecca, anybody on the call or anybody within CXC. I know Rebecca put on a little bit of our contact information here. Happy to share, explain, collaborate with you on resource planning globally. I know we're coming on the end of the year, so a lot of things are coming fast and furious as it relates to initiatives in Q1 and Q2. We're here to help, and we hope and look forward to being part of your overall growth strategies, but very excited about 2025 as a core in North America. We know the market as a whole is going to come back. It's going to be resurgent, and that's going to be exciting for every organization globally, in our opinion. So have a great holiday. Please be safe. Enjoy the New Year celebration with family and friends, and we're very excited to talk to you in the new year.
Absolutely. And after today's
Thank you.
webinar, you can expect to receive a follow-up email from our team with the recording of today's sessions. You'll also get a 2-page information sheet, and early next week, you can expect an early Christmas gift from CXC team, as we will be sending you our global hiring guide for Mexico. So do keep a checkout on your inbox. They will be heading over shortly.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Scott. See you.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, everyone.